Now, we'll get to Henry V today. If you're interested in movie versions of it, there are two that I would recommend. I think the best overall is a movie version of it that was done by Kenneth Branagh, who directs it and plays Henry V. I always like to point out odd bits of casting, and so I will say a very young Christian Bale plays the boy in the play, and that's pretty complete and an excellent performance. Another very famous version of it was done by the great Shakespearean actor Laurence Olivier. Again, he directed it and played Henry V. It was done shortly after World War II, or maybe even during World War II. It's heavily cut. It's rather one-sided, very patriotic and pro-Henry V, but it is Olivier who really is great in the role. Unfortunately, in that Hollow Crown series, the one with Tom Hiddleston, the Henry V is the weakest part of that set, and it's so heavily cut, I can barely bring myself to recommend it, but it does have some good aspects to it. So again, overall, the Branagh one, I don't know how available it is anymore. It seemed to have gone out of print last time I looked at it, but that would be the one to watch. Okay. Now, we're gradually learning something, I hope, about Shakespeare and politics in this course. Shakespeare is very famous for his wonderful understanding of human nature. What I've been trying to point out is that he couldn't understand human nature if he didn't understand politics. Because there are, as I was talking about last time, there are certain human potentialities that really manifest themselves only in political life, or at a minimum are only revealed at their best in political life. So if you don't look at politics, you're not looking at the full range of human potential. And there are certain forms of human excellence that really are fulfilled only in political life. And I was talking about thumos in that regard, anger. Anger can look awfully petulant and petty, but when you see someone get angry about justice and get angry about his nation's safety, I mean, then you start to see the higher goal of anger. And that's why we often get these dual moralities in Shakespeare, where something looks different from different angles. There's another example of this in Henry IV, Part 2, if you turn to page 30, where the Lord Chief Justice is berating Falstaff. So this is Act 2, Scene 1, about line 125. And Falstaff says to the Lord Chief Justice, "You call honorable boldness impudent sauciness." There it is again. We got two different definitions. What looks like honorable boldness to me looks like impudent sauciness to you. And again, that's that division between the morality of ordinary people and the morality of nobles. For nobles, it looks like honorable boldness. To ordinary people who often suffer from nobility, it looks like impudent sauciness. And then Falstaff continues, "If a man will make courtesy and say nothing, he is virtuous." That's the morality of the weak there. They call virtuous someone who's meek and unassuming and are actually frightened by nobility. So that's why Shakespeare so often turns to politics. As I pointed out, all his tragedies are in one way or another set in the political world. Romeo and Juliet seems like the least, but we'll see next week that in fact even Romeo and Juliet is political. At the same time, and this is why Shakespeare is so complex and why he's tragic, he sees a great deal that is problematic with political life. It forces you very often to do nasty things, like kill people, sometimes even your friends, or at least your associates. Moreover, political life seems to close off other aspects of human life, as we'll be seeing with Hal, that to become king, he has to cut himself off from his old friends, from that whole erotic side of life that Falstaff was exposing him to. So politics is very important in human life in Shakespeare, but it is not everything. It often cuts people off from truth. They're surrounded by flatterers. They often can't fulfill themselves in other ways because they've decided to fulfill themselves in politics. So there's a very systematic and ongoing critique of political life in Shakespeare, and that's what creates tragedy for him, because he sees that political life on a very basic level is necessary. Someone has to deal with these issues, and as I've mentioned before, in politics, not to do something is to make a decision and in effect do something. If Bolingbroke just says, okay, we got a really lousy king, but it's not my problem, then England falls prey to all the problems being created by Richard II. In some sense, Bolingbroke's indignation when his rights are taken away and his title is taken away produces a good effect for England, because it brings someone more effective to the kingship. And moreover, Shakespeare really sees possibilities for nobility in politics. There's a lot of phony nobles, a lot of false nobility, but Shakespeare allows for true nobility as well. I think when we read the plays now and when we interpret them, there's a tendency to see this critique of politics and think that's all that is in Shakespeare. And as we've seen, the critique goes very deep. And Shakespeare shows some very nasty aspects of political life. At the same time, though, he sees it as something that ultimately can't be avoided, and that does still maintain a potential for nobility. So again, that's why politics produces these tragic situations for Shakespeare. Okay, let's try to finish up on Henry IV, Part 2, and move on to Henry V today. So, I was talking about the old people in Henry IV, Part 2, Justice Silence and Justice Shallow, and of course Falstaff is growing old. There's a great poignancy to this play, a real note of sadness, as these characters that we've gotten to like in Part 1, we see them aging and on their way to death. There's a real note of sadness sounded in this play. If you look at page 45, which would be Act 2, Scene 4, about line 66, Doll Tearsheet says, trying to be reconciled with Falstaff, "Come, I'll be friends with thee, Jack. Thou art going to the wars, and whether I shall ever see thee again or no, there is nobody cares." And there really is a sense of night descending. We have heard the chimes at midnight, the sense of the increasing loneliness of the characters. Now, a lot of this is related to the fact that they have relied on the body. They have been creatures of the flesh. They've indulged in food and drink and in sex. And that's one of the things that you can't do forever. And we do see diseases in this play, some of them presumably venereal. And there is this sense that he who lives by the flesh will die by the flesh. And so although there is this celebration of the body in the very figure of Falstaff in Part 1, this carnival sense in the play, oh, it's great now, we can indulge in the senses, the law will not prohibit our indulging in our senses. Shakespeare counterpoints that here in Part 2 with the sense that if you try to live life that way, you're going to face the limits of the body itself. So, for Shadow and Silence, he creates what I will call the poetry of senility. Truly remarkable, as I was trying to show you last time, this dialogue between old people where the mind wanders and bounces back and forth from one subject to another. I don't believe we will see this in drama again until the 20th century in Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter. And again, it just shows Shakespeare's range just as an author. But there's, as I was trying to suggest, there's a political aspect to this. For one thing, we are seeing that the generation of Richard II is dying off, which will make possible a stronger regime for Henry V. But also there are suggestions in this play of gerontocracy. That is, what we're seeing here is the rule of the old. After all, Shallow and Silence are justices of the peace. They are responsible for decisions, and in particular, we have another draft board scene in this play, and what we're seeing is old men sending young men to their death. And that's another nasty aspect of politics as Shakespeare portrays it. And again, this is not something you see in the Iliad. It's not something you normally see in literature that celebrates war, what it looks like to the poor jerks who are serving in the infantry. And so we have this wonderful character, Moldy. This is page 66, Act 3, Scene 2, about line 114, when Falstaff says, "Prick 'em," which means, take him for the army. And Moldy joking on the phrase, punning on the phrase, "I was pricked well enough before, and you could have let me alone." Again, remember, I've suggested this whole realm of ordinary human beings in this play who don't give a damn about politics and would just like to be let alone. "You could have left me alone. My old dame will be undone now for one to do a husbandry and a drudgery. You need not to have pricked me. There are other men fitter to go out than I." And then he has to buy himself out of service. And on page 70, this is still Act 3, Scene 2, line 236. "And good Master Corporal Captain, for my dame's sake stand my friend. She has nobody to do anything about her when I'm gone, and she is old and cannot help herself. You should have 40, sir." And that's where he buys himself out of the draft. And, there is this sense these are human beings. They will be leaving behind other human beings that they care for and who care for them. Although these plays ultimately celebrate the glorious English military victories of Henry V, they constantly show the underside of that. And I think there's a particularly interesting inflection here. Maybe it's a suggestion about politics in general, that in general it is the rule of the old over the young. And that's particularly true in the kinds of regimes we're looking at in these plays, monarchies, regimes that are based on legitimacy and the principle of succession, and try to build up this sense of the ancestral basis of things. That generally does mean the rule of the old over the young. We'll see in the comedies how that comes up in romantic terms. And Shakespeare has a lot of sympathy for the rule of the old over the young, because in many ways it is the rule of the wise over the foolish, or at least it's the rule of the experienced over the inexperienced. But there's also a sense here, as we will see in the comedies as well, that Shakespeare speaks up for youth and its energies, youth and its possibilities. And another problematic aspect of politics would be the extent to which it does involve the old ruling the young. And of course, the horror here is these people who, like Silence and Shallow, who will not go into the wars, are sending off young people to die. So related to that is the picture of Henry IV in the play. I haven't said too much about him, but he is a perfect example of what happens to a king. He is actually prematurely aged. His first line in part 1 was, "So shaken as we are, so wan with care." This guy who was so youthful and energetic in Richard II, it's as if he comes to the throne and suddenly he ages 20 years. And we do not see him as a happy man in this play. He himself develops grave doubts about political life. And again, we saw that in Richard II. We're going to see it in King Lear. This is a very profound and important theme in Shakespeare, that these political figures themselves come to question politics. And in particular, Henry, like many political figures, has insomnia. This is page 58. So Act 3, Scene 1, about line 4. How many thousand of my poorest subjects are at this hour asleep? O sleep, O gentle sleep, nature's soft nurse, how have I frighted thee? And it really comes home to Henry IV here, that his subjects can sleep, but he can't. Politics offers all these compensations, the glory of it, the sense of honor, and yet Shakespeare does not ever show politics to be an easy life. And here, Henry explores the paradox that his subjects can sleep easy while he can't. And it is, in a sense, what Machiavelli suggests, that these nobles compete and fight all for these ordinary people who just want to be left alone and to lead their lives in peace. And we see it here. Henry's so surprised. Line 15, still on page 58. O thou dull God, why liest thou with the vile and loathsome beds, and leavest the kingly couch, a watch case, or a common larum bell? And then building up on page 59, so Act 3, Scene 1, line 31. One of the most famous lines in all of Shakespeare, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. And that's certainly something we see in this play and all these history plays. We'll see it again in King Lear. Now, what is interesting here is Henry is still king when he makes this statement. This, if you will, is a step beyond Richard II. Richard II had to be kicked out of the kingship before he could gain any perspective on it and begin to appreciate what might be wrong with it. Remember, he said, when I'm a king, I'm not a beggar. When I'm a beggar, I'm not a king. This is a progression now in that we're seeing someone who is king who has come to these recognitions, these painful recognitions that grow out of all the struggle he has had to go through to maintain the crown and all his worries about what England would be like under his son's rule. We're going to see a corresponding moment in Henry V, which will mark an even greater progression, in that Hal, at the peak of his powers, though in great danger, will be able to raise this issue of the value of kingship and the troubles with kingship. That shows something more philosophical about Hal. There's this sense in Hal that he can understand these things without having to be kicked out of office or without having to be on the verge of death, as Henry IV is here. It's one reason why Hal is such an unusual figure in Shakespeare, that he will understand the limitations of kingship even while he is still at a peak as a king. Now, we have one last confrontation between Henry IV and Prince Hal, and as I've been saying, it is never easy for these two men to talk to each other. They cannot talk to each other simply as father and son, because they're always king and prince, and it's typical that their last confrontation should be a painful one, because Prince Hal wanders in. His father's had one of his fainting spells. Hal thinks he's dead, and so he takes the crown. This would be on page 98. So Act 4, Scene 5, about line 20. Why doth the crown lie there upon his pillow, being so troublesome a bedfellow? O polished perturbation, golden care, that keep the ports of slumber open wide to many a watchful night. Sleep with it now, yet not so sound and half so deeply sweet as he whose brow with homely big and bound snores out the watch of night. Like father, like son. It's an interesting moment that, without knowing it here, Hal echoes what we've just seen his father saying in the earlier scene. And both are struck by the fact that ordinary people sleep well while kings do not. And it's a really touching moment. We know that Hal is sincere. He's not saying, "Oh, goody, goody, the crown's mine. I couldn't wait for the old guy to die." No, he really was reaching for the crown with a full acceptance of the responsibilities and the painful duties it was going to involve him in. And so top of 99, line 36, "Thy due from me is tears and heavy sorrows of the blood, which nature, love, and filial tenderness shall, O dear Father, pay thee plenteously." But unfortunately, King Henry IV wakes up and doesn't see his son and doesn't see his crown, and immediately assumes that his son was overeager for his death and has walked off with a crown. So on page 100, so still Act 4, Scene 5, line 65, "How quickly nature falls into revolt when gold becomes her object. For this the foolish overcareful fathers have broke their sleep with thoughts, their brains with care, their bones with industry." And it's really a horrible moment for him. It confirms all his most horrible suspicions. Page 101, and when he confronts the prince, so now line 92, he says, "Thy wish," Hal says, "I never thought to hear you speak again. Thy wish was Father Harry to that thought." And he sees this, Henry IV sees this as a fulfillment of his worst nightmares. Bottom of page 101, about line 118, "For now a time has come to mock at form. Harry V is crowned, up vanity, down royal state." He really foresees total chaos in his kingdom because this wastrel son of his is going to come to the throne. And here we see how useful all those hours Hal spent with Falstaff were, because he learned some rhetoric and he learned how to wriggle out of a situation like this. This is a very Falstaffian moment. Hal's been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He's been reaching for the crown. He's been stealing the crown, and his father calls him on it. Now, Hal comes up with a sincere answer, and we know he's sincere because we've heard him in soliloquy earlier. But still, what he does tell his father is very Falstaffian. It's, "I didn't steal the crown, I was protecting you from it." Very much, when Hal caught Falstaff with that lie, and Falstaff said, "No, I knew it was you. I knew you were the prince, and so I, by instinct, didn't attack you." He says, look at, this is page 103, line 165, so still in Act 4, Scene 5, line 165, "Thus, my most royal liege, accusing it, I put it on my head to try with it as with an enemy that had before my face murdered my father." Now then, that's an honest answer, but it's also a very clever one. And to come up with it on the spur of the moment, it's very good to have had a teacher like Falstaff. And it does work. That Henry fortunately believes him. And notice he says, line 180, "pleading so wisely in excuse of it." Something Falstaff was so good at. And now he turns to, in a kind of Godfather scene, to tell his son what he's got to do now. Line 183, "God knows, my son, by what bypaths and indirect crooked ways I met this crown. And I myself know well how troublesome it sat upon my head. To thee it shall descend with better quiet, better opinion, better confirmation, for all the soil of the achievement goes with me into the earth. It seemed in me but as an honor snatched with boisterous hand, and I had many living to upbraid my gain of it by their assurances, which daily grew to quarrel and to bloodshed, wounding supposed peace." This is the problem I've been talking about, that Henry, for all his talents and kingly nature, lacked legitimacy. And he suffered endless revolts because of it. And notice, I had many living to a brave. As we've learned from all this counting of the people who are dead, there are fewer and fewer of these living now who will challenge Hal. And that's his hope, that his son will come to the throne legitimately. Line 198. And now my death changes the mood, for what in me was purchased falls upon thee in a more fairer sort, so thou the garland wears successively. Combining the legitimacy with the kingly nature. And being a good father, Henry IV gives his son one last bit of Machiavellian advice. Line 207. He's had all these problems, which to avoid, I cut them off, and had a purpose now to lead out many to the Holy Land, lest rest and lying still might make them look too near unto my state. Therefore, my Harry, be it thy course to busy giddy minds with foreign quarrels, that action hence borne out may waste the memory of the former days. So we see here what has been Henry IV's strategy. He's always talking about another crusade. He realizes what he lost when he desacralized the kingship, when he killed the godly king, Richard II. He has been desperate to get some of that sacred aura back to him by talking of this crusade of going to the Holy Land. And then in a very sick joke, which comes out of the history on page 105, Henry's being carried off to die, and he asks the name of the room in the palace. And so line 234, it's called Jerusalem. My noble Lord, Lord be to God, even there my life must end. It hath been prophesied to me many years I should not die but in Jerusalem, which vainly I suppose the Holy Land, but bear me to that chamber, there I'll lie, in that Jerusalem shall Harry die. So the prophecy was fulfilled, but it turned out to turn on this fact that a room in the palace was named Jerusalem. So this is a tremendous deflation of Henry IV's great hope to lead a crusade. And as I mentioned, he had even helped build a Crusader palace as far away as Bodrum, Turkey. So this was a serious bit of history. Now it's good advice, it's good Machiavellian advice. You got all these domestic problems, got all these rebels at home. Focus them on a foreign enemy. Use foreign policy to divert the minds of your people away from problems. In domestic policy, this is a path that many political leaders pursue to this day, and Shakespeare is very aware of it, and we will see how it plays out in Henry V, because Henry V, in fact, does pursue this policy, only is smart enough to know to lead a crusade against France. That the Middle East is too far away. It's impractical. You're not going to win it. They'd lost many battles in the Middle East trying to regain the Holy Land, and so his crusade will be much more practical and be against the French. So Henry IV dies, and the king is dead. Long live the king! And let's in the fifth act we see what happens when Hal finally comes to the throne. And there's a lot of nervousness about it. People are afraid. They've known only bad things about this young wastrel, Prince Hal. So on page 110, so it's Act 5, Scene 2, about line 15. Warwick and the Lord Chief Justice are very concerned. Here comes the heavy issue of dead Harry. This line 14. Oh, that the living Harry had the temper of he, the worst of these three gentlemen, how many nobles then should hold their places that must strike sail to spirits of vile sort? And the Lord Chief Justice said, "O God, I fear all will be overturned." Now, from the beginning, in part one, we saw that Falstaff was talking about overturning the whole regime, renaming thieves into gentlemen and not punishing thieves anymore. That's what these people are afraid of. And Clarence is saying to the Lord Chief Justice, top of page 111, about line 33, "Well, you must now speak Sir John Falstaff fair, which swims against your stream of quality." Everyone is expecting the new regime to be presided over by Sir John Falstaff, the man who was the companion of Prince Hal. And the Chief Justice sticks to his guns, line 35, "Sweet Princess, what I did in honor, led by the impartial conduct of my soul, and never shall you see that I will beg a ragged and forestalled remission. If truth and upright innocency fail me, I'll to the king my master that is dead, and tell him who has sent me after him." A man of great integrity, again, willing to stand by his principles. He'd rather die than violate his principles. If Falstaff was in these circumstances, it would just be the reverse. And now we hear Prince Hal for the first time as King Henry V, and he is transformed, though with a sense of the transformation. The first lines we hear, line 44 on page 111, "This new and gorgeous garment majesty sits not so easy on me as you think." He doesn't pretend that this isn't difficult, becoming king, and that's important. His awareness of roles, of what it is to play a role, really stands him in good stead here. All that acting he's been doing. And so the first thing he does is to reassure his brothers. "Brothers, you mix your sadness with some fear. This is the English, not the Turkish court, not Amurath, and Amurath succeeds, but Harry. Now, here he's referring to a custom in the Ottoman Empire that when a sultan assumed the throne, he killed all his younger brothers. This you can see, if you visit Istanbul, you can see this. It's a very, very creepy thing. If you go into the tombs of the sultans, including Suleiman the Magnificent, you will see this huge casket for the sultan, somewhat smaller but still large casket for the sultana, and then you'll see all these tiny caskets. It's a really frightening sight. These are all the younger brothers of the Sultan who were killed when he came to the throne, so there'd be no question of the succession who was on the throne. And you can see all the great mosques, the Suleymaniye, where Suleiman is buried. You can see it there, the so-called Blue Mosque, the Sultan Ahmad Mosque. I was really quite struck when I first saw this. And Shakespeare's aware of it. And by the way, he's more aware of the Ottoman Empire than we would think. We tend to underestimate the international knowledge of people in the Renaissance because they didn't have CNN and Fox News or the internet, but actually they were very aware of what was going on, and it was not so distant from their lives. Now, as your notes say, Amurath is Amurath the Fourth of Turkey. This is very pretentious, but it was Amurath III. The guy is wrong. Amurath IV didn't rule until the 17th century, late in the 17th century. This is actually Murad III, Amurath III. This is a huge anachronism because, as your notes point out, this sultan came to power in 1574. Shakespeare's audience might very well have caught this reference because in 1580, Murad III signed a treaty with Queen Elizabeth, the Anglo-Turkey Treaty of 1580, which established English trading rights in Istanbul. This eventually led to the founding of the so-called Levant Company, which was a precursor of the East India Company. This is very important stuff historically. It's very important in the history of the British Empire. And what was going on, it's very strange stuff historically. Elizabeth, as a Protestant monarch, was allying with a Muslim monarch against the Catholics. The great opposition at the time, far more important than England versus the Catholic world, was the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Ottoman Empire, versus the Holy Roman Empire, which was Catholic and chiefly based in Spain, the Netherlands, and Austria. The Ottoman sultans conceived that they could ally with some of the Protestant forces in Western Europe against their big enemies, the Catholics. So there was a treaty in 1580 between the English and this very man, Murad III, Amurath III. There's a massive anachronism. These events are in Shakespeare's day, not in the days of Henry IV or Henry V, but I think he relied on the thought that his audience would have heard of this guy, Amurath. That he just concluded a big treaty with the English, and the English were about to move into Istanbul. Anyway, fascinating little touch there, and I couldn't resist the opportunity to correct our annotator here. Hal's coming to the throne here, and this is the moment he's been waiting for. Remember, he predicted this back in part one, that he would make a spectacular appearance by reforming. And indeed, he stages it, page 112, creates this little drama here. So it's Act 5, Scene 2, about line 68. When the Lord Chief Justice has to present himself to the king, Henry V says, "How might a prince of my great hopes forget so great indignities you laid upon me? What? Rate, rebuke, and roughly send to prison the immediate heir of England? Was this easy? May this be washed and Levian forgotten?" So he's not pretending it didn't happen. He's raising the issue. You threw me into prison. What do you think's going to happen to you now? And again, the Chief Justice doesn't budge. Line 70, "I then did use the person of your father, the image of his power lay then in me, and in the administration of his law, whilst I was busy for the commonwealth, your highness pleased it to forget my place." And then skipping a few lines, very interesting what the Lord Chief Justice says, line 84 is, "Be you contented, wearing now the garland, to have a son set your decrees at naught? To pluck down justice from your awful bench, to trip the chorus of law and blunt the sword that guards the peace and safety of your person, nay more, to spurn at your most royal image and mock your workings in a second body. Question your royal thoughts, make the case yours, be now the father, and propose the son." And that's indeed what Hal has to do now. He has to become the father. We saw him act this out back in part one in the Tavern with Falstaff, where he had to adopt the role of his father, and almost the first thing he did then was to banish Falstaff. And we're going to see that here. And in general, we see him growing up here. And the Lord Chief Justice saying, step into your father's shoes, and Hal indeed does that. And so line 107, "So shall I live to speak my father's words." This is what his father was so worried about, that he would not be like his father, and instead we see that he will be. It's very clear that he understands he can't be the boy anymore, the wayward truant son. He has to be the father, and that means he's got to make some serious political decisions here. One of them, it's interesting, page 114, line 134, "Now call we our high court of parliament, and let us choose such limbs of noble counsel that the great body of our state may go in equal rank with the best governed nation." And I'll just add that on page 125, we hear again, so this is Act 5, Scene 5, about line 104, "The king hath called his parliament, my lord." We have not seen this before in the plays. Now, to the disappointment of many political scientists writing about Shakespeare, he does not make as much of Parliament as we would wish he did. We who live in a democracy and no parliamentary democracies and so on, we so much want Shakespeare just to be us and to endorse the same kind of government we live in. In general, Shakespeare downplays the importance of Parliament. He never stages some great scene with parliamentary orations. So, nevertheless, it is interesting, and we see the difference here that Richard II scorned the Commons, just saw it as this source of money, didn't have any respect for it. It will be part of Howe's success as a monarch that he does understand the importance of his Parliament, the House of Lords, getting the nobles behind him, getting good advice. Now remember, this is not in any way a representative democracy. When Howe talks about Parliament, he's not talking about the representatives of the people who will vote on matters as representatives of the people. He's seeing the Parliament as people that advise him. He still makes the decisions. But what he's trying to do is get noble counsel out of the Parliament. So again, he's not about to convert England into a representative democracy here. But still, it's important and I think significant that we see him make this gesture towards the Parliament. Now, Shakespeare is building up to the big confrontation scene in the work. He has to show us the threat, so we switch to a scene at Justice Shallow's house where the Falstaff and his friends get the news that Henry IV is dead, that now Henry V rules, and their expectations are pretty ominous. This is page 119. So about Act 5, Scene 3, about line 116, when Pistol says Harry the Fourth or Fifth, and Falstaff is just thrilled with the situation, line 125. Master Robert Shallow, choose what office thou wilt in the land, 'tis thine. Pistol, I will double charge thee with dignities. So he thinks the moment of fulfillment has come. He's been talking all along, when thou art king, to Hal, and now he thinks, line 132, I am fortune's steward. And above all, line 137, Master Shallow, I know the young king is sick for me. Let us take any man's horses. The laws of England are at my commandment. And he doesn't mince words here. And when he says, let us take any man's horses, they can now steal with impunity because his best friend, Hal, is King Henry V, and the laws of England are at my commandment. And you know, again, there's a lot to admire in Falstaff. I'm somewhat surprised, though, at people who give him unconditional admiration. When we see what a corrupt and corrupting force he is and what he would mean in political terms here, he means to exploit the new king for everything he can get. Now, in fact, Shakespeare adds this scene 4 in Act 5 to show us that the days of chaos are ending, that the forces of order are reasserting themselves. They're out there in Eastcheap arresting the criminals, the thieves, the whores. As I said, things have gotten very far in the world of this play. In terms of anarchy and the dissolution of law and order in England, and now things have to be rounded up. And then the hostess, quickly, this is page 121, Act 5, Scene 5, line 25. She's always getting things wrong, but here she secretly gets them right. She says, "Oh God, that right should thus overcome might." What she means to say is, oh God, that might should overcome right. But she gets it wrong and gets it right. that what's happening here is the forces of order, right, are now overcoming might. That we're in a situation where law is prevailing over criminality, and we're not back in that world that Falstaff spoke of, where whoever outnumbered the other guy managed to rob him. That was the world where might makes right. We're getting back to a world here where right can prevail over might. And so we've been building up to this for a long time in Act 5. I'm always puzzled when people say that the banishment of Falstaff comes unprepared for. We've been building up to it at least since Act 2, Scene 4 of Part 1, and arguably from the very first scene in which Falstaff appears, in which Hal says he's waiting to have a very public reformation. And indeed, Falstaff blunders in to giving Hal exactly the moment he needs to establish his credibility as the new king. He shows up, Falstaff, on page 122, like a little kid. My best friend is king now. Wait till you see what happens. So page 122, Act 5, Scene 5, about line 6. I will leer upon him as it comes by, and do but mark the countenance that he will give me. This is not politic. Indeed, you have to see how badly Falstaff is behaving here, how inappropriately. Had he approached Hal in private, put this moment off, it might have been okay, and we'll see how Hal hints at that. But this is what everyone has been expecting, that Hal will become Henry V, and his old criminal associates will be running the country. So more or less at his coronation, this is page 123, so still Act 5, Scene 5, about line 41, Falstaff's there saying, God save thy grace, King Hal, my royal Hal. You can't call the king Hal anymore. You got to at least call him Henry. And then, God save thee, my sweet boy. And, the Chief Justice says to him, line 46, have you your wits? Know you what 'tis you speak? They're trying to get him to cool his jets. And indeed, he sets up Hal to be able to deliver what Hal wanted to, this spectacular moment of reformation. It's a very ugly speech to the extent we love Falstaff. This is line 48. I know thee not, old man, fall to thy prayers. How ill white hairs becomes a fool and jester. Now we'll see that we're going to meet several fools and jesters in this course, most notably in King Lear, and we'll see the important role they have for Shakespeare's kings and in his plays. This is not quite the insult it appears to be if you understand it philosophically, but still, I've long dreamt of such a kind of man. Again, it's very important that he associates Falstaff with the world of dreams here. Because he's associated, the world of dreams is the world of desires. Shakespeare didn't have to read Freud to know that. And we will see this in the comedies, most notably in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the connection between Eros and the dream world, how important that is in Romeo and Juliet and in A Midsummer Night's Dream. So I have long dreamt of such a kind of man. This is ugly. So surface-dwelled, so old and so profane. But being awaked, I do despise my dream. Make less thy body hence, and more thy grace. Leave gormandizing. Know the grave doth gape for thee thrice wider than for other men. Reply not to me with a full-born jest. Presume not that I am the thing I was. For God doth know, so shall the world perceive. And you see, that's the key here, the perception. That's why this moment is so useful to Prince Hal. This will be the miracle. This will be when he reverses all the expectations and rejects Falstaff instead of embracing him. That I have turned away my former self, so will I those that kept me company. When thou dost hear I am as I have been, approach me, and thou shalt be as thou wast, the tutor and the feeder of my riots. Till then, I banish thee. on pain of death, as I have done the rest of my misleaders, not to come near our person by 10 mile. For competence of life, I will allow you that lack of means enforce you not to evils. And as we hear you do reform yourselves, we will, according to your strengths and qualities, give you advancement. Be it your charge, my lord, to see perform the tenor of my word. Now, this was his old friend Falstaff, sweet Jack Falstaff, honest Jack Falstaff, and so on. And it does show you that politics isn't everything, that to pursue political life now, he has to cut himself off from an aspect of life that he valued as a young man. Presumably this is not easy for him, though he has to make it look easy to give it the political effect he wants. But notice it's pretty soft. We first hear, I banish thee. Now Machiavelli would tell him, execute Falstaff. Let Falstaff's head appear on a post in London. That's what Machiavelli would have advised Hal to do here, like Ramiro de Orco. But no, it's just I banish thee. And then it turns out he's not even banishing him from England. He's banishing him from a 10-mile radius of the court. And also he's going to make some provisions here for competence of life. Now, it's interesting. Contrast this with Richard II. Some ways we've seen this as the kingly act, the ability to punish, the ability to banish. When Richard did this to Bolingbroke, remember he banished him 10 years and then he took 6 years off it. Henry does not go back on this. It's in a way a much more painful thing for him to do than banishing Bolingbroke was for Richard II. And yet Henry has thought it out all ahead of time. It's going to be this punishment, it's going to be this much and not that, and I'm going to stick to it. No scene of Falstaff weeping and Henry says, oh, I'll banish you within 5 miles, not 10 miles. No, he knows he has to stick with this. And indeed, even Falstaff seems to realize what's going on here. This is still on page 124, so about line 80. Do not you grieve at this. I shall be sent for in private to him. Suddenly, Falstaff remembers the value of privacy. And indeed, had he approached Hal in private, this might have been so much easier. Show up at the back room of the palace, not when all the paparazzi are there, photographing the coronation. Look you, he must seem thus to the world. Fear not your advancements. I will be the man yet that shall make you great. Now, this is very Falstaffian. This is him bouncing back, as always. Falstaff's famous resiliency. Don't worry, I'm really going to be in charge. That's not going to happen. Still, Falstaff is smart enough to see he must seem thus to the world. And then Henry V's brother Lancaster shows up and says, this is about line 98 on page 125, I like this fair proceeding of the king's. He hath intent, his wanted followers shall all be very well provided for, but all are banished till their conversations appear more wise and modest to the world. So we learn it's even more gentle than it first appears. They're going to be well provided for. They're offered the possibility of reformation to be restored into the king's favor. So now again, I do not want to mitigate the harshness of what happens here. And indeed, spoiler alert, it's going to lead to Falstaff's death of a broken heart, but still, when Henry says not Amurath and Amurath succeeds, he's basically saying I'm not a tyrant, I'm not a murderous king, I'm going to be a pretty decent king, as we'll see him say in Henry V. I am no tyrant, but a Christian king. So again, this act, many people have condemned Henry V enormously for banishing Falstaff, and yet, on the scale of nastiness, it's pretty low. Again, Machiavelli would probably tell him, kill the guy. and all his friends, and everybody in Eastcheap. Doesn't kill anybody, just banishes him with a nice proviso. It's almost if he's setting Falstaff up in a think tank in the suburbs of London. And so eventually they can get together and consult. I do think it's important to measure the exact details of the banishment to appreciate. Again, I do think it shows that politics is not all-inclusive. Something we'll be talking about more when we get to the comedies, but there's something exclusive about the political world. In a certain sense, it has to exclude the world of comedy here. The king must not openly embrace that world of erotic indulgence that Falstaff stood for. So it's a very emblematic moment about Shakespeare's thought about politics. This is a perfect example of something that's necessary in politics. To get the laws respected again, Henry must show that he does not honor the people who break the law. But I think he pays a personal price for this. But in any case, we can see he's lost something. Remember what Falstaff said, banish Jack Falstaff and banish all the world. Well, it isn't quite all the world, but I do think Shakespeare sees it as a large chunk of it. Okay, let's move on to Henry V, and we're getting perilously close to being back on schedule here. So, hope you brought your Henry V with you. Turn to page 88. I'm jumping ahead here. This is the famous St. Crispin's Day speech. So Act 4, Scene 3, about line 28 to 9. This speech was memorized by generations of English schoolboys at a high point of both the Branagh and the Olivier films. But line 28, but if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive. Now, the last time I checked the Bible, it is a sin to covet honor. In fact, it's a sin pretty much to covet anything in the Bible, if you remember those 10 Commandment things. So that's a pretty remarkable line, but if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive. Someone comes up to you and says, if it be a sin to kill your own grandmother, I am the most offending soul alive. You say, wait a minute, who is this guy? And don't let him into the old age home. I begin with this to suggest Shakespeare's daring in this play, that he really does confront in this play the tension between the two moralities we've been talking about. The morality of the noblemen, the aggressive, thumotic nobles who do covet honor, and ordinary morality, which finds that a sin, specifically Christian morality. Again, Henry, as we'll see, says, I am no tyrant, but a Christian king. But this play is going to raise some very interesting questions about Christian kings and whether the Christianity is compatible with the kingship. And you see it right here on the battle, the eve of a great battle, where he's terribly outnumbered and is facing possible annihilation. Henry's going to need some really aggressive people behind him. And so he's going to give him a big speech. We'll look at this in detail later, but to show him the honor they will gain by fighting bravely against the French the next day. So on this day and on this battlefield, it cannot be a sin to covet honor. Only men who covet honor will win this battle. But on every other day, it is a sin to covet honor, and that's a real problem. And after the battle, you won't hear Henry speaking about coveting honor anymore. He'll be saying, oh, we got no honor from this. Oh, God did this. This is all what God did. So this is a play that very much turns on this tension between the classical heroic values and the Christian values that came into play with each other during the Renaissance. And let me begin by just pointing out the strong strain of classical antiquity in this play. There have been hints at it in the Henry IV Parts 1 and 2. I've talked about the epic quality and the evocation of the Iliad. It's much stronger in this play, and indeed, if you turn to the very beginning, page 3, the prologue, the first thing we hear is, "Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention." And here is the closest Shakespeare ever comes to assimilating his plays to the classical epic tradition. You know this from the beginning of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and Virgil's imitation of this in the Aeneid, that the classical epic begins with the invocation of the muse. Shakespeare was quite aware of this. Again, George Chapman's translation of the Iliad was just appearing in English when this play came out, and I've talked about this revival of the classical epic tradition in Shakespeare's day. Now, it is very possible that Shakespeare hoped at some point to write an epic poem. Edmund Spenser had written a kind of epic romance called The Faerie Queen. Samuel Daniel had written this epic poem about the Civil Wars, which is one of the sources for the history plays. There were various people in Shakespeare's day trying to write epics, and at that time, the epic was regarded as the highest form of literature. So that if you wanted to be a great writer for the ages, you had to produce an epic. That's what Homer had done, it's what Virgil had done, it's what Dante had done, it's what John Milton would go on to do in the 17th century. John Milton, one of the most ambitious literary figures ever, who wanted to be on the map of the biggie poets, knew he spent his whole life working up to writing Paradise Lost. And there are hints that Shakespeare had this in mind. Early in the 1590s, during one of the periods when the theaters were closed for plague, they didn't have snow days in Elizabethan England, they had plague days. And he wrote two poems, The Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis, both very classical poems. They're not epics, they're kind of minor epics, shorter narrative poems, dedicated them to the Earl of Southampton. There are signs that he was hoping he'd get out of this dirty theater business and establish himself as a serious writer. The writing of plays in Shakespeare's day had roughly the social status of writing television shows now. And I'm completely convinced if Shakespeare was alive today, he'd be writing television shows. But all these people go out to Hollywood, they write television shows to support them writing the great American novel, or even maybe just writing the great American movie. They don't realize that what they're doing in television is far more artistic than anything they could do in novels or movies these days. And I think something like that may have been going on in Shakespeare's mind, that, I'll make a name for myself, make a little money writing plays, but what I really want to do is write an epic poem, because that's what will make me famous. Fortunately, he figured out that wasn't so. I think he began to realize that the great English epic would be these four history plays. Again, there are people who refer to them as the Henriad, as if they were the Iliad of England, and that he could write a work that would capture the spirit of England, and particularly the great English virtues and the nature of the monarchy, but that would have more effect on the stage than it would in a literary work. Now, again, I can't prove this. This is just my guess here. But what you do see here in Henry V is his desire to give an epic quality to the drama. Now, part of it is that he realized the limitations of his stage. That's what this whole prologue is about. He was about to write a play about great battles, and he realized how inadequately they would be staged in the Elizabethan theater. But this whole use of the prologue, this chorus in the play, does seem to be a very self-conscious effort to give the texture of a classical epic to this story, with, I think, great success. That Shakespeare felt he was now doing for the English people with his Henry plays what Homer had done for the Greek people with his Iliad. So there are many touches in the play of classicism, For example, on page 20, again in one of these prologues here to Act 2, so page 20, about line 6, following the mirror of all English kings with winged heels as English Mercuries. This is one of these great Renaissance moments when we see the classical and Christian traditions come together. This is the mirror of all Christian kings, but he's followed, his soldiers are like English Mercuries, something out of classical mythology. And Shakespeare has a whole character in the play who brings alive the world of classical antiquity, and that's the Welshman Llewellyn. He's there, as we'll see later, because Shakespeare wants to say something about the Welsh. But if you turn to page 48, you'll see that Llewellyn's always talking about the ancient Romans. So this is Act 3, Scene 2, about line 73. He has no more directions than the true disciplines of the wars, look you, of the Roman disciplines, than is a puppy dog. What we learn from Llewellyn is the martial tradition. The tradition of war is a Roman tradition. And he keeps coming back to this, top of page 49, so about line 84. He will maintain his argument as well as any military man in the world in the disciplines of the pristine wars of the Romans. So Llewellyn is in there to play to keep referring us back to the ancient world. And if you want to know about military things, you refer to the Romans. Or the Greeks. Look at page 59. This is Act 3, Scene 6, line 6. The Duke of Exeter is as magnanimous as Agamemnon. Now, magnanimous is Latin for a Greek word, megalosoukia, which means greatness of soul. Magnanimous means great soul. And this is a term, Aristotle, book 4 of the Nicomachean Ethics, he talks about this virtue of the great-souled man. And we see it, it's very powerful that that word appears here, that magnanimity is the peak of being a noble. As Aristotle said, he's proud and justifiably so. And then same page we hear about Agamemnon, page 59, about line 14. I think in very conscience he is as valiant a man as Mark Antony. Shakespeare went on to write a play about Mark Antony, and we see how important these Roman models are in the play. Look at page 75, again from Llewellyn, Act 4, Scene 1, about line 68. If you would take the pains but to examine the wars of Pompey the Great, you shall find, I warrant you, that there is no tittle-tattle nor pibble-pabble in Pompey's camp. Again, you want to see the standards of good warfare, you go back to the Romans and Pompey the Great. And then finally, if you turn to page 98, this is a very strange moment. We'll have to come back to it because it's in the middle of, some ways, the most perplexing part of the play, Henry's decision to execute the French prisoners. But in the middle of it, and this is usually omitted in productions, Llewellyn gets into a conversation with Gower about Alexander the Great. Now, Llewellyn is Welsh, and in his stage Welsh, he pronounces B's as if they're P's. So this is Act 4, Scene 7, line 12. As he was poor at Monmouth, Captain Gower, what call ye the town's name where Alexander the Pig was born? And Gower corrects him, Alexander the Great. Why, I pray you, is not Pig great? The pig, or the great, or the mighty, or the huge, or the magnanimous, comes back there, are all of one reckoning, save the phrases, little variations. Now, again, there's a marvelous touch here. Shakespeare does hold up these models of ancient greatness in the play. Mark Antony, Pompey, Alexander the Great. But he also reminds us that this was Alexander the Pig. it's again that double perspective. What looks so noble, the magnanimity, the greatness of soul of Alexander, the world conqueror, in some ways was just piggishness. And this play is about empire, whether Henry V can found a British empire, and Shakespeare admires him for it, and it's presented as a noble achievement. There is this other side, though, that maybe Alexander the Big is only Alexander the Pig. Then Llewellyn goes on to compare Alexander with Henry V. I think Alexander, this is line 20, Gower says, I think Alexander the Great was born in Macedon. His father was called Philip of Macedon, as I take it. And Llewellyn goes on, I think it is Macedon where Alexander is born. That I don't think is a pun. I tell you, Captain, if you look at the maps of the world, I warrant you shall find, in the comparisons between Macedon and Monmouth, that the situations look you as both alike. There is a river in Macedon, and there is also, moreover, a river at Monmouth. It's called Wyatt Monmouth, but as out of my brains, what is the name of the other river? But 'tis all one, 'tis alike as my fingers is my fingers, and there is salmons in both. Now here, Shakespeare is referring to Plutarch, one of his favorite authors. Plutarch, the ancient biographer. Shakespeare drew heavily upon Plutarch's lives, the so-called parallel lives. In his writing, he based Julius Caesar, Coriolanus, Antony, Cleopatra completely on Plutarch's lives of those characters. Even in Midsummer Night's Dream, we'll see he drew upon Plutarch's life of Theseus of Athens. By all evidence, we have Plutarch as one of Shakespeare's favorite authors and one of the people he read most closely. Now, Plutarch's lives, called his parallel lives, what he does is take a Greek and a Roman hero and compare them. So that, for example, compares Coriolanus to Alcibiades. He goes through these heroes and finds a Greek and a hero to be compared with a Roman hero. And here, Shakespeare is having fun with that in having Llewellyn have this Plutarchian moment where he's comparing not a Greek and a Roman hero, but an ancient and a modern hero. He's comparing Alexander the Great with Henry V. And this shows great hopes for Henry V to compare him to one of the greatest world conquerors. And Shakespeare's having a little fun with it, that Llewellyn can't remember the name of the river in Macedon, but he's convinced that there were salmons in both of them. But then look at further on in the speech, page 98, about line 32, there's figures in all things. Alexander, God knows, and you know, in his rages and his furies and his wraths and his cholers and his moods and his displeasures and his indignations, and also being a little intoxicates in his brains, did in his ails and his angers, look you, kill his best friend Clitus. Llewellyn is hoping to make this comparison come out to the benefit of Henry V. They're similar warriors, conquerors, but Alexander killed his best friend Clitus. Now notice what comes up here. Alexander, in his rages and his furies and his wraths and his cholers. That's all thumos there. This is that irrational element in the soul that we first saw with Hotspur, drunk with choler. And there it is, rages, furies, wraths, and choler. And what's more, intoxicates. Alexander's like a bad combination of Hotspur and Falstaff now. All thumos of Hotspur and all the eros of Falstaff. And so in his ails and his angers, what a great phrase to bring these two worlds together, the worlds of eros and thumos in Alexander, his ails and his angers. And look at the distinction that Llewellyn then draws about line 46. I speak but in the figures and comparisons of it. As Alexander killed his friend Clitus, being in his ales and his cups, so also Harry Monmouth, being in his right wits and his good judgments, turned away the fat knight with the great belly doublet. He was full of jests and jibes and knaveries and muggers. I forgot his name, Sir John Falstaff. Where we see eros and thumos in Alexander, we see logos in Henry V. right wits and good judgments. Well, I think this is a wonderful scene for seeing the formula for this play, that where we've been seeing people governed by these irrational forces of ails and angers, we're now going to see a king who's guided by his right wits and his good judgments. So you see something of it in this play, the hope to revive classical antiquity, but in a form that's even better, where this great conquering hero will be ruled by his judgment. Finally, one last example, and in some ways the most interesting, of the classical background to the play. And this is page 108. So the chorus that begins Act 5, starting at the very bottom of page 109. So Act 5, chorus, about line 24. Henry has won the great battle of Agincourt here. Boy, I'm spoiling everything for you in this play. But anyway, he's won the battle of Agincourt and he's returned to London. And so line 25, how London doth pour out her citizens. Now the top of 110, the mayor and all his brethren and best sort, like to the senators of the antique Rome, with the plebeians swarming at their heels, go forth and fetch their conquering Caesar in. As by a lower but by loving likelihood, were now the general of our gracious empress, as in good time he may, from Ireland coming, bringing the rebellion, broach it on a sword, how many would the peaceful city quit to welcome them? This is a remarkable moment in Elizabethan drama, and I think we're kind of lucky to have gotten it. The general of our gracious empress is our by now old friend, the Earl of Essex. Essex had been sent in 1599 to bring Ireland back under control. The appointment was actually engineered by his enemies in court, who figured if you want to ruin this guy, let him see if he can subdue the Irish. Now, three things are being compared in this passage. We've got ancient Rome, contemporary Elizabethan England, and the time of Henry V. We've got images of three military captains here. Among the ancient Romans, these great military leaders would enjoy a triumph. If you know Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, it opens with Julius Caesar celebrating a triumph over Pompey the Great. Henry V is in effect being compared to a Caesar. Modern emperors compare themselves to Caesar. Both the word Tsar and the words Kaiser are simply translations of Caesar. Tsar is the Russian word for Caesar, and Kaiser is the German word for Caesar. We see here the hope of modern military heroes, that they become heroes like Caesar. So Shakespeare is comparing Henry V to Julius Caesar, to all the Roman Caesars, the great military conquerors of the ancient world. At the same time, he's proposing maybe the Earl of Essex is the next Caesar in my own day. Now, it's really weird that this has survived in print, because this play is probably from 1598, 1599, when it was still okay to say nice things about the Earl of Essex. By 1601, he led a rebellion about Queen Elizabeth and was beheaded in the Tower of London. And you're not supposed to talk about Essex nicely anymore. So much so, there are some editors who claim that this is not a reference to the Earl of Essex. It's a reference to Lord Mountjoy, who was the guy sent after the Earl of Essex to try to subdue Ireland. Most editors, and most importantly me, think that this is the reference to the Earl of Essex. If it's Mountjoy, the play would have to have been written later than we think it was written, or at least this passage would have had to be written later. But again, I'll tell you, there are some people who insist this can't be Essex. Anyway, it is so fascinating as a Renaissance moment, because it shows you what I mean when I say that the Renaissance was an effort to revive classical antiquity, and not just culturally but politically here. That one of the great hopes of the Renaissance world was new Caesars, that we could get rulers who would be as great as Julius Caesar and would put together empires the way Julius Caesar does. And it's fascinating enough that Shakespeare compares Henry V to Caesar here, but that he also compares the Earl of Essex, gives some idea of what the hopes there were accruing to the Earl of Essex in Elizabeth's day, that this might be the man to lead England to great military victories. This might be the man to jumpstart a British Empire. Remember, we're not even at 1607 yet when the British send off the colonists to Jamestown. We're at a point where the great empires in the world are the Holy Roman Empire, largely based in Spain at this point, and of course the Ottoman Empire. And the British were very aware of this. But anyway, so I bring up all these classical references in the play so that you can see that this play really does, in Renaissance fashion, try to revive classical antiquity and its hopes of military heroism, of great Caesars who might lead conquests. And that's what's going to make Henry's life so problematic. Because again, to be that kind of Caesar, you must covet honor. And you must suppress for at least a moment the idea that coveting honor is a sin. In other words, you must suppress the Christian side of your nature. And again, always what's so fascinating but problematic about the Renaissance is an attempt to revive classical antiquity within a Christian civilization where the Christianity and the classicism are very much at odds. Now I'm going to explore that further in the play, but I got like 2 minutes here. So, any questions thus far about either Henry IV Part 2? Yes?
Are we supposed to take Fluellen seriously, though?
No. It's
supposed to be a sort of comic representation of these people who are obsessed with Roman modes of fighting and things like that.
Yeah, the thing about Fluellen is he is pedantic, and he keeps insisting upon the tight rules of war, and he is a comic figure, but he's a Welshman, and Henry the Welshman embraces him. So he cannot simply be dismissed, and I would not rest this solely on the evidence of Fluellen, because the chorus, who is not to be taken comically, speaks about these parallels between the ancient Rome and modern Britain. So again, there can be, as we've seen in Shakespeare, you can't just say something isn't contributing to the play because it's comic. Again, there's something very funny about this. And again, specifically pedantic, and it's like trying to go by the book. And we see that one thing we'll talk about next time is Henry V does not go by the book. So yes, you're right that he's a comic figure, but that he raises this issue. Shakespeare is using him to get this stuff into play here. And again, the complexity, even within this, of saying it's Alexander the Big, but it's also Alexander the Pig. I mean, Shakespeare is very aware of how problematic it is to revive classical heroism within a Christian civilization. It leads you to say crazy things like, if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending man alive. It's amazing that Henry gets away with saying that, but he's on a battlefield when he does it. So, okay then. We'll continue with Henry V, and I'll probably spill over into the first Romeo and Juliet lecture a week from Thursday, but we will get to Romeo and Juliet next week. Again, the Coop asked me to tell you they're going to start returning books. Is there anybody here who would like the Coop to hold the books longer? Or can they start returning? Anyone still eager to buy? Okay, down to poor Shakespeare. He returns off his royalties.